Well, shalom, dear friends, and welcome to our Genesis Bible study. Today we're going to be in chapter 39, which picks up again with the story of Joseph. Kind of an interesting last few chapters that we've had. Chapter 37 really introduces us to Joseph as the main character of the remainder of the Genesis narrative. Chapter 38 interrupts that with the story of Judah and his dealings with Tamar and his sons and so forth. A little bit of a shady chapter there. So we studied through that. Now we're back today in the story of Joseph in chapter 39 of Genesis. And again, he will be the main character for the rest of the book of Genesis. So I think what we'll do is continue ahead with our usual PowerPoint presentation of background material for this chapter. Again, I will offer you the option of just fast forwarding through the background material to the Bible software program where you see Genesis 39. And in the video, you can just click play and take it up from there. The material I have in the background study is, not that important to the study of this chapter. But for those who might be, just clicking on this video out of sequence, I do want to provide a little bit of background material. So here we go with that. Genesis chapter 39. I guess I have to get my slides in order here. So there's the first one. I've been recommending a book that I had published recently called Nazarene Essene Theology. It's available on Amazon. I only recommend this book because a lot of the material in this very large volume is drawn from Genesis. It's kind of a commentary on the book of Genesis and might help you as we go through these videos. We've also been looking at dispensational charts. A lot of the dispensational charts in this collection of charts by Alfred Eade is the theologian and I believe also the artist who put these charts together. They're my favorite dispensational charts. I use them regularly in my Bible studies, and I do have permission from his family publishing company that makes these charts available. I have their permission to use them in my studies, which is very kind of them. So this is the age of promise, because although God promises things and fulfills things all throughout the scriptures and even beyond into our day and age, his promises are the central focus of this era of history, which starts with the calling of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then the 12 sons, which would eventually become the 12 tribes of Israel, into the captivity, the period of slavery in Egypt, right up until the beginning of the book of Exodus. So that's the period of time that we're looking at. I've kept this map in our background material because it defines the boundaries of the promised land as being from the river of Egypt on the west, which would be the Nile River, to the great river Euphrates on the north and the east. And I just like to point out that that's a larger piece of real estate than has ever been occupied by Israel and the Jewish people. And that continues to be the fact even to this day. So the Jews have never experienced the entirety of God's promise of the promised land. But I do believe that that promise will be kept in the millennial kingdom, Revelation chapter 20. We've also looked at the family tree of Abraham, beginning with his father Terah and his brothers Haran, Nahor, and Abraham also. His nephew Lot figures into the early chapters of Genesis. I have highlighted this and included a map with this slide because a part of the Abrahamic promise to God was, "You shall be a father of many nations." And indeed he was. Everybody realizes that he was the ancestor of the Israelites, but also of the Edomites through his grandson Esau, the Ishmaelites through his son Ishmael, And then through Lot's branch of the family tree, the Moabites and the Ammonites, and those are indicated on the map here. Although I like to point out that the Ishmaelites are a lot farther south than this. My map's just not big enough to show that. We have looked at Jacob's two wives and two, I hesitate to call them concubines. They did bear him children, but they were servants of the real wives. So these are like first level wives and second level wives. And here are all the sons of Jacob and his wives. Here's Joseph, the favorite with the coat of many colors. And then, the different moms are show which children they bore. We have a map of Joseph's travels, and so far the only ones that are of interest to us are Joseph going up to see his brothers while they were out in the fields with their flocks in Dothan, and then his being sold into slavery and taken to Egypt. This map shows him taken to Goshen, and that may or may not be where he was taken. I'm guessing that it would be in the house of Pharaoh, which I think would be in Heliopolis, a little bit further south here. But at least the map shows Joseph in Egypt, where he will be for the rest of his life and the rest of the book of Genesis. So that brings us to the conclusion of our background material. So let us go to our text and pick up our friends who fast forwarded here. We are reading using the Accordance Bible software. I'm not sure if this is the free version anymore. I may have updated it at some point along the line. I forget whether I did or not, but it's a nice software program. And I've got 4 Bibles here. I've got an English New King James Version with Strong's lexical aids. We've got the Hebrew Old Testament, the BHS, Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia. This may actually be the Leningrad Codex. But anyway, it's the Hebrew Old Testament. We've got the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. And then I have Dake's Study Bible notes for each of the verses. Dake's is my favorite study Bible. It's controversial, but we won't go into the controversies now. I just find it great, and it has a lot of Greek and Hebrew references, which is my cup of tea. So let's begin with Genesis 39, verse 1. Now Yosef had been taken down to Egypt. Of course, we studied about that in Genesis 37. And Potiphar is the name of the person who bought him as a slave. This verse gives us a lot of information about Potiphar, and it's interesting stuff, which may enlighten us a little bit about the narrative that is about to follow. So let's see what we can learn about Potiphar. Our New King James says that he was an officer of Pharaoh. The word for officer, and it's highlighted in our Hebrew Old Testament, it is the Hebrew word saris. And in the information window down at the bottom of the page, and I'll take my pointer down here, you can see that the basic foundational meaning of the word saris is a eunuch, which is kind of an uncommon word in our common vocabulary and language. A eunuch is a castrated male. And the reason, particularly with reference to an officer of Pharaoh, is that a eunuch would probably be working in the palace for the Pharaoh, but as an official in the court, he would have access to the Pharaoh's harem, which would be his collection of women that satisfied his bodily needs. It was important to kings not to be humiliated by the officers that worked for them. And that might happen if a officer was to sleep with one of the king's women and impregnate her, and she showed up pregnant, that would be a humiliation to the Pharaoh. So it was not at all uncommon in antiquity, maybe in some countries today, that officials in the king's court were all castrated. So although they would have access to these women, they wouldn't be able to humiliate the king by causing these women to be pregnant and bear children by a mere officer of the court. Now, a secondary meaning is official or officer. And that is a legitimate translation. It's often used in contexts that don't demand a castrated male. But I think it's most likely that Potiphar, although high-ranking and powerful and influential in the king's court, as such, he would probably be a castrated male. So keep that in mind. We're also told about the position that he held in the king's court. So he's called a captain. Our English version says he's captain of the guard. Captain is the Hebrew word sar, which we run into a number of times. Technically, it means a prince, but also like a chieftain or a leader or someone who holds an official position. In government or something like that. So SAR can mean a lot of things. Captain is fine. But when we're told what he's the captain of, we're told he's the captain of the guard, which again is an okay translation. The Hebrew word is tavach. But if we go down to our information window again, the basic foundational meaning of tabach is a cook, which again is okay, but it's not the technical, most accurate meaning. A tabach is a butcher. Now, a butcher, so what it could mean is that Potiphar was the chief chef or the sar among the chefs, and that may be. But rather, I think it can also mean a butcher of human beings or an executioner. And that's what I think Potiphar was. So it's possible that the description here is just saying that Potiphar was an official in the king's court, maybe his cook. I think what it's saying is that he was a castrated male official in the king's court. The pharaoh is the Egyptian word for a king. In the Pharaoh's court, and that he was the chief of the executioners. So he would have something to do with prisons, and he would be the one who executed prisoners who were convicted of capital offenses. So that's Potiphar, and he's the one who bought him, Yosef, from the Ishmaelites. Remember, Ishmaelites is the name of a people group. They are the descendants of Ishmael, a son of Abraham, by his second-class wife in the family, by Hagar, an Egyptian maidservant. But Ishmael was kind of banished from the household after Isaac was born. Particularly after Ishmael, the older brother, was kind of making fun and mocking his brother. That's when they were banished. And one interesting thing that we'll come across again in our text today is in the story of Ishmael, when Sarah complained to Abraham that Ishmael was mocking Isaac. The word for mocking is sahak in Hebrew, which means to laugh, which is what Isaac's name means. It could be laughter for joy, or it can be laughter in a mocking sense. So Ishmael was sahaking Isaac. He was laughing at the one whose name means laughter. Okay, that's why Ishmael was banished. But that's the people group to whom Yosef was sold. So he was kind of sold into the family. Now, in the story of the selling of Yosef, which would be chapter 37, this group of people to whom Yosef was sold, the Ishmaelites, are also called Midianites. Midianites is where they live, which would be south of the promised land, but east of the Gulf of Aqaba in the Red Sea. And according to the New Testament, and I think the Old Testament, Mount Sinai is not in the Sinai Peninsula, which is west of the Gulf of Aqaba, but is in Midian, which is nowadays part of Saudi Arabia, which is east of the Gulf of Aqaba. So everybody who thinks the Sinai Peninsula is in thinks that Mount Sinai is in the Sinai Peninsula. I think they're wrong, and there have been a number of excavations and expeditions that I think have proven that pretty thoroughly. But that's kind of beside the point. The people group to whom he was sold were the Ishmaelites, and they had taken him down there to Mitzrayim. Now, verse 2, the Lord. And when you see Lord in all caps like this, the ORD are smaller, but still all caps. That is a reference to what is called the Tetragrammaton, which is, I think, Latin for 4 letters. So the 4-letter name of God is this right here. It is pronounced Yahweh. It is a hifil form of the verb of being, so that it's, the one who what always exists, I guess. We could say. So his name is Yahweh, the eternally existent one. But at some time, and I think after the Babylonian captivity, which would be like 586 to 539 or something like that. So during the era of Ezra and Nehemiah and so forth, the intertestamental period. Actually, it's not the intertestamental period. It's still part of the Old Testament period, but the end of it. And I'm going to say prior to the 3rd century BC. And I fixed that date because the Septuagint was written in the 3rd century and evidenced the substitution of another name for the sacred name of God. At that point in time, 3rd century BC, the Jews has already stopped pronouncing this name. And they did so for, there's a reasonable explanation for that. One of the 10 commandments is, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord in vain. So the Jews said, rather than risking breaking that commandment by taking the Lord's name in vain, we won't take it at all. We won't pronounce it at all. And so, although these 4 letters, Yud He Vav He, remain in the Hebrew Old Testament, the vowels that you see here, which are a shva and a tametz here, there is also a holem, which does appear in some Hebrew Old Testament versions and doesn't appear in others. These are the vowels for the Hebrew word Adonai, which means Lord, like master or sir. It's one of the ways that we address our God, but it's not as high and sacred a way of addressing him as is pronouncing his name, Yahweh. So normally what I do is follow along with the convention of substituting the name Adonai for Yahweh, and that's what I'll be doing for the rest of this video. In the Greek Septuagint, and here we have it, the Tetragrammaton is rendered with the Greek word kurios, which means Lord, just like Adonai does in Hebrew. But in the Greek text, the sacred 4 letters do not appear at all. Just the substitution is made. So by the time of the Septuagint, the substitution was being made. Now, some people say, if we know how to pronounce the sacred name, shouldn't we do it? Isn't it a bad idea to intentionally mispronounce God's sacred name with another name that we know is not the sacred name? And in a way, I agree with that, and that's why I feel comfortable pronouncing that, risking the fear of offending Jewish people who are really put off by someone who attempts to pronounce the sacred name. But also, when the New Testament was written, it was written in, it may have initially been written in the Hebrew language, but ultimately the New Testament that comes to us is in Greek. And so the apostles and the evangelists, the writers of the New Testament, used this convention of substituting Adonai or Kurios for the sacred name of God. So if it was good enough for the apostles, that's kind of the pattern that I follow also. I think Martin Luther had a good insight on this when he wrote the small catechism of the Lutheran Church. He indicated that the sacred name should be used freely only when in prayer, praise, and giving of thanks. So in kind of a devotional way. And that's actually the practice that I follow. In my devotions, I will speak to the Lord using his name. But ordinarily when teaching or making these videos, I try to just use Adonai. So Adonai was with Yosef, and he was a successful man. A successful man is a matzliach, a matzliach. You see it highlighted in our Hebrew Old Testament, and it means to prosper, to succeed, or to rush. I'm not sure how it would be used for rush. I would have to see it in a context, but that's probably right. But I want to focus on the fact that because the Lord was with Joseph, he was a successful man, a prosperous man. And that is the most unlikely, ironic thing you can ever imagine. Joseph is a slave taken to a foreign country and bought, purchased by an officer in the foreign king's court. And yet the Bible says he was a prosperous and successful man. And as we continue through the chapters of Genesis, you're going to see how that's true. In the Dake Bible, he talks about the prosperity of God, and he lists a whole bunch of Bible characters who were prosperous in the way of having a lot of money, a lot of possessions, a lot of influence. And you would say, well, how could Joseph have money or influence or possessions? You'll see, because that really happens. So Joshua, Joseph, David, Shlomo, Uzziah, a king, Hizkiah, another king, Daniel, a prophet. The Messiah is said to be a prosperous, influential, and wealthy person. That's Yeshua. Okay, so the Bible teaches us that the people that God loves, he prospers them. He desires to prosper them. He makes opportunities for them to gain wealth, possessions, influence, etc. That is his will for people. And one of the reasons that many, like modern day followers of Yeshua, are not prosperous is that they've been taught that God doesn't want you prosperous. He wants you poor. He wants you sick. He wants you down in the dumps. He wants you persecuted. And quite frankly, that is not God's will for man. Now, persecutions will happen, especially if you're an outspoken believer in Yeshua. Christians, believers will encounter health problems, but God has provided healing for that. Not all Christians, followers of Yeshua, get healed of their diseases, but that doesn't mean that they couldn't. It doesn't mean that healing isn't potentially there for them. Not all Christians have lots and lots of money, but there are patterns of lifestyle that one can follow to have one's financial needs taken care of, and then some, abundant prosperity, and so forth. So Joseph is one of these successful people. He is a matzliach, and you and I can be too. Verse 3, or did we cover all that? He was a successful man in the house of his master, the Mitzrayi, the Egyptian. So that would be Potiphar. But ultimately, Potiphar worked for Pharaoh, so he's in the court of Pharaoh, working for this official of Pharaoh's court. Okay, And his master saw, Potiphar, saw that Adonai was with him, that Adonai made all he did prosper. Here's our word again, matzliach, prosper in his hand. So Potiphar not only recognizes by outward physical circumstances in Joseph's life, he not only recognizes that the Lord is with him, but the Lord has prospered him in his own hand, in God's own hand. So he sees this by just observing Yosef. So Yosef found favor in his sight, in Potiphar's sight, and he served him. I might add, he served him well and was rewarded for it. This Potiphar is a smart guy. He's not only observant, and he not only comes to the proper conclusions based on what he's observed, but he makes use of that situation for his own benefit. And there is nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with doing that. So then he, Potiphar, made him, Yosef, overseer of his house. The Hebrew word for this is pachad. Pachad has maybe more meanings than any other word in the Hebrew language. I think one of my teachers counted up there are like 39 meanings to this word. But again, a kind of a basic. Let's look at the ones down in the information window. It says a pachad has reference to a number, an appointment, punishment, visitation. But I think the foundational meaning of this word is a stewardship, a job or a mission that is given to someone to bear some responsibility and benefit by it. Okay? Potiphar gave Yosef a job to do, and if he does a good job, he's gonna be well paid. He's gonna be well rewarded, not only by the Lord but also by Potiphar. So he made him overseer, pachad, of his house, of Potiphar's house, and all that he had, he put under Yosef's authority. So Potiphar sees a good thing here. He sees Joseph personally being prospered by God. And he's thinking, if I treat Yosef well and place all my household, which would be my finances, my property, the people who work for me, under his leadership as the overseer, the pachad, then I'll be blessed along with Joseph. So in other words, I see Joseph being blessed by God. I want to get in on the blessing. And so I will bless Joseph, expecting to get blessed in return. And interestingly enough, although Potiphar probably knew very little about Adonai, about the Lord, the one true God of the Bible, he is practicing an aspect of the Abrahamic covenant that involves blessing and being blessed. So God promised Abraham in the Abrahamic covenant that he would make him the father of many nations. He would have many children that would eventually become a nation. He would give him land from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates, a large portion of the Middle East. So land is involved. But then a blessing. God said, I've chosen you to be a people that will receive my blessings. And then God says, whoever blesses you, Abraham, I will bless. But whoever curses you, Abraham, I will curse. And that part of the Abrahamic covenant, that blessing and being blessed or cursed based on how one treats Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov and the family of the chosen people, that still holds true today. Now, I'm going to give you an example of that. As I'm making this video, this is May the 9th of the year 2024. And as I'm making this video, there is a war raging in Israel. On October 7th of last year, Hamas, who lived in Gaza, committed a horrific terrorist attack on the Israel population. Thousands of Jews were murdered, were massacred, and it started a war. So the war has been going on in Israel for these what would that be, 7 or 8 months, and it's very interesting to see the reactions around the world of governments, of other governments, of people in leadership in governments, like the reaction of people in the Congress of the United States and the President of the United States. Also among the populations, lots of demonstrations are taking place in America and around the world in favor of Hamas. And I am not misinterpreting their words. They are chanting, "We are Hamas, death to the Jews, death to America." This is happening mainly on college campuses in our country. And, I've got my opinion about it. But what I want to indicate is that when we look at the Abrahamic covenant, the way we relate to the descendants of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, the modern state of Israel and the Jewish people, the chosen people, determines whether God is going to bless us or not. Now, our president, Joe Biden, in my opinion, is trying to play both sides of this. In public statements that he makes, he talks about an ironclad alliance that we have with Israel. Like nothing can shake this alliance, our friendship, our support of Israel. But at the same time, recently, the Congress of the U.S. passed a bill that would equip Israel with weapons and finances and things that they need to carry out this war victoriously. But now, because President Biden is trying to play both sides of this war, he's trying to support Israel. That would invite a blessing from God, but he's also threatening not to send, and in fact is not sending some of those weapons to Israel. So he is kind of, in a way, threatening Israel by saying, if you enter into the last Hamas stronghold in the city of Rafah in Gaza, President Biden says, we will not support that. We will not provide weapons for it in any way, because President Biden wants to gain favor with all the people who support the Palestinians and Hamas. There is a small group of senators and congresspersons who support the Palestinians and Hamas and are against the Jews. So President Biden is trying to play it both ways. He's trying to bless the Israelis on one hand, and he's trying to bless the Palestinians on the other hand, and they're at war. So my great fear is that the support, the blessing that America has traditionally had for the modern state of Israel and the Jewish people throughout their 70-some years of existence is growing weak and shaky. And if that happens, and if America breaks its covenant relationships of support and love for Israel, stand by, because curses from God will come our way. Interestingly enough, in the last couple of days, tornadoes have gone through the center of the country where I live. A lot of my neighbors had huge hailstones rain upon their houses and break windows and wreck their siding and things like that. It missed our house. Yeah, the storms missed our house. We got a little bit of rain, a little bit of wind, but nothing bad happened. Could this be a judgment from God? I am totally in support of Israel. Think strategically and tactically they need to win this war against Hamas, and probably another one that's on the horizon with Hezbollah up in the southern portions of Lebanon. But the idea of blessing God's people and being blessed in return is a biblical principle, a theological principle that carries throughout the Bible and beyond, up until modern times. So let's bless God's people and get in on the blessing like Potiphar did. Verse 5. So it was that from the time that he, Potiphar, had made him, Yosef, overseer, pakad, of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house. See how that works? Potiphar wants to get on the blessing. He blesses Yosef, and his household gets blessed, and it was blessed for Yosef's sake. Biglal in Hebrew means for the sake of the person in question, Yosef. Biglal Yosef. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. So Potiphar's a smart guy, and he got in on the blessing, and it's working for him. And I'm going to take it a little bit further. I'm going to say Potiphar loved Yosef. Best purchase he ever made. Thus, he, Potiphar, left all that he had in Yosef's hand. And now this is an interesting phrase. It says he did not know, yada, the most common word for having knowledge of. He did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. So in other words, he turned everything over to Yosef. Yosef itemized all of his master's property. He kept track of it. If he could invest it and, make a profit for his master, he would do that. So Yosef kept track of it. Potiphar did not. He did not check up on Yosef to make sure he was doing a good job. He trusted him implicitly, and it worked to Potiphar's delight. So he didn't know what he had except for the bread which he ate. And I'm not sure, what that is. It may just, who is the he here? Is this the bread that Joseph ate, or is this the bread that Potiphar ate? What it may mean is that he didn't have a care in the world. He didn't have any interaction with Joseph about all of his stuff. But if he wanted meatloaf for dinner, Potiphar might have said, "Hey, Joseph, how about having meatloaf served for my dinner?" It may mean that. If it doesn't mean that, I don't know what it does mean. Now, Yosef was handsome in form and appearance. So Day goes into some details about Joseph's appearance based on tradition and kind of historical records and stuff. You might find this interesting. So let's just quickly read through it. Yosef was handsome and had good physique. And the Hebrew text that describes Joseph is consistent with that. The same Hebrew expressions are used of him, are also used of Rachel, who was Joseph's favorite wife, and Jacob fell in love with Rachel because why? She was beautiful. She was drop dead gorgeous. And the same can be said in a male way about Joseph. He was a heartthrob. He was beautiful to look at. Persian poets of the 12th chapter of the Quran, which is the Muslim Islamic version of the Bible, speak of his beauty as perfect. Tradition says that Zul-Iha, that would be traditionally the name of Potiphar's wife. She's just called his wife in the Bible, but tradition names her as Zul-Iha. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but I don't care. Was at first a virtuous woman, but when she saw Yosef, she became a slave to her passion. Isn't that interesting? That the appearance of Yosef caused her to follow a path of immorality that we're going to read about in the next few verses. So she was at first virtuous, but when she saw Joseph, she couldn't control herself. And wow, I mean, that is so true in our modern, sexually charged, passionate society. People commit all kinds of sexual immorality because they can't control their passions. On one occasion, she supposedly invited 40 of the most beautiful women of Egypt to a dinner. When they saw Yosef, they were so moved with admiration that they exclaimed with one accord that he must be an angel. Um, that's all, it's all tradition, so maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But doesn't that tell you something about Joseph and what's about to take place in his life? Now, Date goes on to say his character stands out as one of the purest in history. He allowed no temptation to affect his high morality, no calamity to shake his implicit faith in God, no adversity to depress him, and no power or position to make him proud and haughty. And in his father's house, he had likely been pampered. In slavery, he was falsely accused. In the palace, as the ruler of what was then to become the greatest kingdom on earth, he was always the same truthful, pure, just, merciful, kind of God-fearing man. That's the kind of person that I want to be, like Joseph. Now, verse 7. It came to pass after these things that his master's wife, Potiphar's wife, cast longing eyes on Yosef. The Hebrew just says, let's see, Adonai El Yosef. Tisa, she lifted up Eneha, her eyes. She lifted up her eyes. But the New King James, so she cast longing eyes on Joseph, which is taking a little bit of liberty, but that's good. I think it's accurate. These are lustful eyes. And this what she says proves it. She said, lie with me, shakav in Hebrew, which can just mean to lay down and take a nap or have a good night's sleep. But it usually means to lie down in a carnal manner and have a little sexual activity there. So she looks at Joseph, just can't control herself. She says, lie with me. Now, I want to talk a little bit about our enemy, Satan. Uh, First of all, before we talk about Satan, let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that Yosef is a type of Yeshua, the Messiah, Jesus Christ. We've already seen one way that he was betrayed by his brothers, sold for a certain number of pieces of silver, and was brutalized as a result of his betrayal by his brothers. Well, here's another comparison. In Matthew 4, I think it's Luke 4, not sure what chapter is. Mark, I'm talking about the temptation of Yeshua, where Satan tempted him with three temptations out in the wilderness of Yehuda, of Judea. And of course, Yeshua passed the test. Now, his type, Yosef, is being tempted. Yes, by Potiphar, but I think also by, not Potiphar, by Potiphar's wife, but also by Satan. So, according to Dake, this was a previously virtuous woman, but she takes one look at Joseph and she's all lusting after him. So, what causes that? That's where we'll talk about Satan. I think one of the things that Satan does, by the way, Satan cannot read your mind. He doesn't know what you're thinking. He's a created angel. He has to observe you to discover what your weaknesses are. Now, he can speak into your mind, like he can whisper things to you so that you receive them internally. He can implant, false notions in your mind and things like that. That can be a temptation. But what he normally does is just observe the behavior of human beings, and it doesn't take him long to figure out what their weak link is. I think that's what's happening with Potiphar's wife. previously virtuous woman, but Satan watches the way that she observes Joseph, and he says, that's my weak link. So he creates opportunities. He manipulates circumstances so that she's in a position where she's going to approach Joseph and follow up on her temptation. Her temptation is to commit sexual immorality with a man she's not married to. And she carries through with it. And it's out of character for her, but Satan, by observing her, knows what her weakness is. He capitalizes on it, and he causes her to be tempted. She fails, and he causes Yosef to be tempted, and we'll see whether he fails or not. If he's a type of Yeshua, he will pass the test. So he's being tested here. I will say that I think because I was conceived and born a sinner, and because of the sexually charged environment that I was raised in, I had great parents, very moral parents, but I was raised in the 60s and the 70s in a sexually charged environment, and bought into the Playboy philosophy and stuff. So I have the same problem that Potiphar's wife does. My eyes are my greatest enemy. And so I have to follow God's guidance to me to guard my eyes, to make sure I don't. I mean, I can glance at a beautiful woman, but if it goes beyond that, I'm going down the road of lust and doing things that I would be ashamed of. So this biblical temptation that we're seeing of Joseph, I'm going to need to handle it the way Joseph needs to handle it as well. And I feel free to talk about, my temptations, because there was a book written by, I think it was Arterburn. He wrote a book called Every Man's Battle, and it's about lust and pornography and things like that. It was like a bestseller because the vast majority of men and women have a problem with sexual lust. Okay, verse 8. But he, Yosef, refused. And he said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me. And that's just a reference to what we talked about before. Potiphar entrusted his whole household, all his possessions, all of his finances, the people who worked for him, trusted them to Joseph and didn't check up. He was not even aware of what Joseph was doing. And that's what Joseph is saying. He says, I'm aware of the trust that my master has put in me by entrusting all this to me. He has committed all that he has to my hand. Verse 9, there is no one greater in this house than I. He's not bragging. He's just stating a fact that he is very grateful for. This, his position in the household is not his doing, it's God's doing. But Potiphar has recognized the situation and taken advantage of it. So he's thankful to God and he's thankful to his master, Potiphar. Nor has he kept back anything from me but you. Everything else was in Joseph's care except his wife. Now, if Potiphar is a saris, if he's a castrated male working for Pharaoh, he gets this. He gets why he is what he is. He's been made a saris that he is, so his master won't be humiliated by any inappropriate dealings with the women in his castle. So the only thing that Pharaoh has held back from Yosef is his wife, because if Yosef would have a little tryst with her, Pharaoh would be humiliated, and he doesn't want that. Now, Joseph is probably quite fortunate that Potiphar didn't castrate him if he's going to trust him with this responsibility. The Bible doesn't say whether he did or he didn't, but I think I would need some proof to believe that Joseph was castrated. Oh, I don't need any proof at all because he bore children. he bore children to to the girl that he would eventually marry. Okay, so Yosef is not castrated. Okay, so so Yosef says he's entrusted everything to my hands, but you. So he says, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Now, if Joseph gives in to this temptation, how is he sinning against God? Isn't he just sinning? Wouldn't he be sinning against Potiphar and against Potiphar's wife? Because he would be sinning against her if he allows her to have sex with a man she's not married to. So the adultery would be between Potiphar and his wife. So that's where the sin would be. But every sin that we commit is a sin against God. It's ultimately a sin against God. Yes, we sin against other people, and it is sin against them, but the ultimate sin is against God. When we break any of the commandments, when we do anything that goes against the Spirit's prompting in our lives, then we're ultimately sinning against God. Psalm 51 is about David and Bathsheba. It's David's kind of response to that. And in that, it's a confession of his sin. David says to God, he admits that he's committed adultery with Bathsheba and he murdered her husband. But in Psalm 51, he says, against you, you only, O God, have I sinned. Against you only. So he's acknowledging that every sin is ultimately against God, and other people get hurt in the process. But David was hurt by his sin, and yeah. So everybody gets hurt, but the sin is ultimately against God. So important thing. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about Potiphar's wife. Let's mitigate a little bit for Potiphar's wife, I guess is what I want to say. So if her husband is a Saris, and she's a normal, virtuous woman, she is never going to have children by her husband. So if she ever wants to have children, it's going to have to be by another male. The medical technologies that enable people to conceive today, test tube babies and surrogate mothers and things like that, basically did not exist in those days. So according to Potiphar's wife, she's never going to be a mother. She is probably not satisfied with her husband's sexual performance. But I think the how shall I say this? I think the issue that she probably has is she's never going to bear children. She looks at Joseph and thinks, this guy would produce beautiful children for me. And it may just be pure lust, pure bodily, lust. Like, I want this guy. He is so beautiful. I want this guy. So Potiphar's being a eunuch, if he indeed is, maybe kind of an explanation for, why she would have this perceived need and why she would be willing to do something immoral to have it. I think she probably imagines that Joseph could bear her children. And so what if it would humiliate her husband? Okay, verse 10. So it was as she spoke to Yosef day by day. She didn't just ask once. She approached him repeatedly. And sometimes when you are just bombarded by temptations, you can hold out once or twice or 3 times or 10 times, but if it keeps up day after day, and if you have the desire to, then sometimes just repeated temptations can cause you to give in. So let's wonder in our minds, let's imagine in our minds what Joseph thought. Now, this is a high-ranking official in Potiphar's court. So what do you think Potiphar's wife looked like, the one he was married to legitimately? probably pretty attractive because this is a powerful man, a wealthy man, an influential man. So he was probably able to win over an attractive wife, either before or after the castration. So let's say Potiphar's wife is good looking. So do you think when Joseph looked at her, do you think he was attracted to her? Do you think he was tempted to have sexual relations with with a woman that he was not married to? If he's like every man's battle, the answer is yes, he was tempted. So this is a legitimate temptation. Were the temptations that Satan did on Jesus legitimate? Some people who don't believe that Jesus was truly human, some people believe that he truly was the Son of God, but he wasn't an authentic human being. They believe it wasn't really tempting. It was just a fruitless effort by Satan. But there was a book written a while back called The Last Temptation of Christ, and they made a movie about it, and a lot of Christians thought it was like an immoral book because it talked about how Jesus was attracted to Mary Magdalene. She was a pretty girl, and she treated him in very affectionate ways. And so, the suggestion was that the last temptation that Jesus experienced on the cross was a temptation to come down and take Mary Magdalene away. I mean, just like miraculously deliver himself from the cross and death and go off and marry Mary Magdalene. And books have been written about that, that we won't go into. So was Joseph tempted? I think he legitimately was. And he held out day by day, temptation after temptation, and he resisted because he loved God. He was grateful to God, even in his downcast circumstances. Now, as one of those men who has every man's battle of fighting against lust, one of the things that you do when you go down the road of lust or pornography or sexual immorality, if you carry it out physically, one of the things you tell yourself is, my life sucks so bad that I owe myself a little pleasure. And Joseph could certainly make that argument. He could certainly make that argument and say, I've been betrayed by my brothers. I'm a slave in the household of this man. He's treating me well, but I'm still a slave. Like all the property that I oversee it's his stuff. So he could say, my life is so terrible that I owe myself some pleasure. So you rationalize it and you do what's going to feel good for a few minutes. Another thing he could rationalize is he could say, if I have a relationship with Potiphar's wife, she's going to love me. She's going to want more. And so she's going to treat me very well. So I could be, if I have relations with her, she's certainly not going to tell her husband about it. As long as she's satisfied and I'm satisfied, we'll just carry on behind his back. And she'll give me all kinds of privileges because this is a rich girl. So you can rationalize it that way. Believe me, you can rationalize sexual immorality in 100 different ways. Oh, my wife's not meeting my needs, so these are legitimate needs that I have. So, I owe it to myself. Even God would understand. All the rationalizations. Joseph is probably dealing with those, but he resists. Good for him. I want to be like Joseph when I grow up. Okay, verse 11. But it happened about this time when Yosef went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside. So the circumstances are prime for what's about to happen. One of the things that you learn as you're battling against lust and sexual immorality is when the circumstances are right, run away. When the circumstances are prime, that will allow you to go down a sinful road, get out of the circumstances. So let's use the story of David again. Hot summer night, David is having trouble sleeping, so he goes out on his balcony, which oversees the whole city of Jerusalem. He looks down on the town, and on a rooftop below, uh, he beholds a beautiful woman on the rooftop, naked, taking a bath. And like the first thing he should do is realize, wow, circumstances are bad here. If I keep looking at her, I'm going to do something that I shouldn't do. He should have just gone back inside and played free cell or solitaire or something like that to try to take his mind off of it. But he didn't. He continued to look. And the lust of the eye turned into the lust of the heart. And he was a powerful man. He could basically get anything he wanted. And he did. He got her. And it was a disaster in his life. God worked it all out for good because God does that. But when circumstances make you vulnerable, get out of the circumstances. Um, so if you're fighting with lust and stuff like that, and you're all by yourself with your computer and you can go to porno sites, get out of that situation. Go take a walk, uh, do push-ups, do whatever you need to do to get out of that situation, because lust is very hard to control. So avoid temptation if at all possible. So circumstances are ripe for what's about to happen. Verse 12, she caught him by his garment. Now, I don't know how he was dressed as a slave in that household. I mean, he seems to be a high-ranking official in Potiphar's household now. So, but normal attire in those days was to wear an undergarment, kind of a linen undergarment, usually like down to the ankles or the mid calf, so a long garment, usually had sleeves in it. And then the ma'il is like the overgarment, which would kind of be decorated or something like that. So it would be a long vest that might, probably reach the same length or a little bit shorter than the undergarment. But what she probably grabbed was the outer garment. Let's see what the Hebrew is. Beged is Hebrew for just clothing, any kind of clothing. So that doesn't tell us much. But I think it was the outer garment. And she grabbed that garment in her hand and fled. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. If she grabbed the undergarment, if that's all he was wearing, then he ran out naked. And so far, I don't think the Bible says that. So we'll say it was the outer garment. But she's got his garment. So this is going to be, it's going to provide her with an opportunity to falsely accuse him. So it was when she saw that he had left his garment, beged, in her hand and fled outside, that she called the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, see, he has brought into us, he being Potiphar, he has brought into us a Hebrew, a Yivrit, Yivri, I should say, to mock us, to tzahak us. We talked about this with Ishmael and Yitzhak. Tzahak is the root word for to laugh, but it can be laugh in a joyful way. Like if a comedian gets a tzahak, he's delighted. This is wonderful. It's affirming for him. But if he gets a tzahak like heckling, then it's not. Or if it's, if it's a tzahak that's offensive to him, or that belittles him, or something like that. If it's mockery, then it's not favorable. So tzahak is an interesting word. It has a broad variety of meanings. This is mocking. So mock is a good translation here. The Potiphar's wife goes on. He came in to me to lie with me. Now, when the Bible says he came into me, that can mean sexual relations. But since she's just talking about she's accusing him of bad intentions, okay? She's not accusing, well, she will be accusing him of rape. Well, no, maybe not. Well, let's just continue on. He came into me. I think it just means he approached me when we were alone in the house. And he did that to lie with me. So here's the reverse. I mean, she wanted him to lie with her. She's accusing him of wanting, she wanted him to lie with her. She's accusing him of him wanting to lie with her. And I cried out with a loud voice. Now, one of the characteristics of human nature is a lot of sinful people are aware of their weaknesses and their sins. And one of the things they do to kind of justify themselves is they accuse other people of the things that they are guilty of or inclined to do sinfully. So a lot of times, in a case like this, like if a woman accuses a man of sexual immorality, he may or may not have done it, but it's a good bet she's done it or been tempted to do it. So looking at that from her perspective is she has made repeated passes at Joseph and he has spurned her on every occasion. And she may be furious about this and now she wants revenge. What does it say about, the vengeance of a woman scorned or something like that? But this is definitely going on with her. And so she accuses Joseph of what she herself was guilty of. So, yeah, he came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. So I don't think in there she's claiming that she was raped. Um, she's accusing him of wanting to rape her. And it happened, verse 15, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside. So she's saying he tried to take advantage of me, and I cried out for help. And when he heard me cry, I already had his coat in my hand. Either I had to rip it off of him as he was trying to get away, or he had, like, thrown it down on the floor and said, let's do it, young lady. And so anyway, she's got his garment. And so she's making up a story about Joseph. She can make up a story about how she got the garment. So she kept his garment with her until his master came home, until Potiphar came home from work. Then she spoke to him, to Potiphar, with words like these, saying, and this is kind of interesting. This is a Hebrew phrase with words like these. It's probably ka'ela. Oh, it's ha'ela. Okay, like kedavarim, like words, these, like words, like these words. It's an interesting phrase in Hebrew, and what you could draw from that as you're interpreting the Bible, if you see an expression like that, words like these, this is a paraphrase. This is not a direct quote from her. It's a paraphrase, and she may have repeated it several times. So there are quotation marks, and it says, the Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came in to mock me. And she goes on. And so it happened, as I lifted my voice and cried out, like for help, that he left his garment with me and fled outside, to try to escape being caught in the act. So it was when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. Now, the question for us is, who is Potiphar angry at? Now, your knee-jerk reaction is going to be, he's going to be angry at Joseph for doing this terrible thing. But let's continue on and see if that holds water. Then Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. Now, let's go back at what we have, tried to kind of infer from the descriptions of Potiphar. So he is what? He's a saris. He's a castrated man that would therefore not be able to impregnate his wife. He's also an officer in the king's court, in Pharaoh's court, but he's the butcher. He's the executioner. So Pharaoh has entrusted Potiphar with the execution of prisoners who deserve it. If Joseph, a slave in the household of an official of Pharaoh's court, has done what he's been accused of doing, whether he actually raped her or not, he tried to, and there's evidence that he did. What would be the sentence? What would be the punishment? If you said death, bingo. Of course it would be. And Potiphar is used to killing people, whether he hanged them or beheaded them, like he knows all the techniques. So all he would have to do is he probably wouldn't even have to check with the Pharaoh. But if he checked with the Pharaoh, he would just say, I bought a slave the other day and he tried to attack my wife. I'm going to kill him off if that's okay with you. And the Pharaoh would give him a thumbs up. Go for it. It's obviously, a crime against Egyptian. But he didn't. He put him in prison. So what does that tell you? Maybe that Potiphar's wife may have a history of this. Joseph may not be the only person she has ever approached. And whether it ever worked out successfully or before or not, if Potiphar knows about this, his anger may not be directed at Joseph, who is a trusted servant in his household, doesn't even need to check up on him. He knows Joseph is an honorable man. His anger may be directed at his wife, his morally loose wife, who's approached other men, and now he's approaching Potiphar's favorite servant. Now, I'm reading a lot into the text that's not actually there, but I think this makes sense to me. Why didn't Potiphar kill Joseph? Maybe because he knew Joseph well enough to know that he was innocent. Or maybe he knew this was going on for a long time and knew that Joseph had resisted, and it was out of character for him to do this with his wife. But he's got to do something. The public accusation has been made. Now, in our country, we have this kind of a motto of the legal system that a person is innocent until proven guilty. That is a tremendous blessing in our country, but in our country, it doesn't hold true. People don't live by that motto anymore. So all a person has to do, like I served as a pastor for many years, and every pastor is aware that if a woman comes to his study, to his office, and for counseling, and if the pastor sits down with this woman and counsels her, just the two of them, nobody in there to observe, to be a witness or anything, all it takes for that pastor to lose his job and maybe be accused of crimes is for that woman to make an accusation against him. That church is going to want nothing to do with that pastor. He will probably lose his job. He'll probably have to try to get a job elsewhere. But if the word is out that he was accused of improprieties with that woman, probably never get another job. He'll probably have to go work at Walmart or something like that to earn a living. So we don't go by that motto, innocent until proven guilty. If it's not true in modern day America, it was certainly not true in ancient Egypt. So the accusation has been made. Potiphar has to do something. He has to respond to this accusation that's been made by his wife. He can either go public and say, my wife is an immoral woman and I know this didn't happen, so Joseph's going to just continue on and I'm going to divorce her. He probably doesn't want to do that because that would bring disrepute on Pharaoh's court. Pharaoh's not going to like that. So he probably took what to his mind was the best way out, and that was to put Joseph in prison. What is Potiphar's job? If he's the executioner, then he deals harshly and severely with prisoners. So Joseph used to be Potiphar's steward, we'll say. His has a stewardship. So his foreman, his steward in his household. Now he's going to be Potiphar's steward or foreman in his workplace in the prison. I think they can prove that in a future verse. So, okay, verse 21. So Joseph wasn't killed, and he should have been, but he was allowed to survive. And that may have been God's grace working through Pharaoh that allowed Joseph to survive these false accusations. Verse 21, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor. Favor is the Hebrew word chen, which means like to get something for nothing. Mercy is chesed. I would translate that grace. Chesed is grace, unmerited favor, but mercy is good with that. The difference between mercy and grace is in grace, you get something you don't deserve. With mercy, you don't get what you do deserve. Okay. So God gave him favor, chen, in the sight of the keeper, the sar of the prison, the sohar, which is just a typical word for a prison. And the keeper of the prison, the sar of the prison, committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. In other words, it was Joseph's responsibility. Does this sound familiar? Has this happened to Joseph previously? Yes, it has. Potiphar did that for him in his household. So somebody's doing it for him again in the prison. Who do you think it might be? Might Potiphar be the sar, like the ruler, the what do you call it? The prison keeper, the jailer. Very well could be. And again, I think we can kind of prove that in the future. Not at this point, but in the future. Verse 23. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority. Who else hadn't done that? Potiphar in his household. Because Adonai was with him, and whatever he did, Joseph did, Adonai made it prosper. Who had come to that conclusion before? Potiphar. Now, the Bible does this a lot. The Bible doesn't, there are a lot of things that the Bible doesn't say outwardly, but it hints at it sometimes repeatedly. So this description of the jailer that sounds almost identical to Potiphar may be a hint to us that we should understand that the jailer is Potiphar. And like I say, I don't think the proof positive has come yet in these verses, but I think it will come in the next chapter. So we'll just see whether it does or not. But anyway, so far the story of Yosef. So we're going to call it quits here since we're focused on the Old Testament. I'm going to give you the priestly blessing from the Old Testament. We have already talked about the sacred name of God and that it is appropriate, according to Martin Luther, that we use that sacred name when we pray, praise, or give thanks. So I'm going to use it in the blessing. If you're going to be offended by this, if you're Jewish, turn off the video now, because I'm about to say the sacred name, as I think Numbers indicates that it should be used when this blessing is placed on God's people. Here we go. Yivarechecha Yahweh vayishmarecha, Ya'er Yahweh panav elecha vayuhunecha, Isa Yahweh panav elecha vayasem lecha shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. Amen. In Yeshua's name. Hope we'll see you next time.